The message arrived on every screen, every radio frequency, and every communication device across Earth simultaneously. No warning, no preliminary contact, just sudden, overwhelming presence that made every human heart skip a beat. Admiral Sarah Chun was reviewing supply reports in her office at the Luna Defense Station when her screens flickered and died. Then, slowly, an image formed. A being that looked vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every possible way. Its skin had a metallic sheen, its eyes were too large and completely black, and when it spoke, the words seemed to bypass the ears and appear directly in the mind. Humans of the third planet. The voice resonated with cold authority. You have been observed. You have been judged. You have been found wanting. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her sidearm, though she knew it would be useless against whatever technology could broadcast directly into every brain on Earth and beyond. I am Overlord Kythex of the Hegemony Council. Your species has developed crude faster than light travel. Your population spreads beyond your birth world. These actions violate the natural order established by your betters over 10,000 of your years ago. The image shifted, showing vast ships that dwarfed Earth's largest space stations. Sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around them, creating an effect that hurt to look at directly. You will submit. You will accept hegemony oversight. Your military forces will be dissolved. Your spacefaring capabilities will be restricted to your immediate solar system. Compliance is not optional. Sarah felt her blood run cold, but not from fear, from rage. She'd spent 30 years in the Space Force, fighting pirates in the asteroid belt, establishing humanity's first permanent colony on Proxima Centauri, and defending Earth's interests against the handful of hostile alien species they'd encountered in their expansion. You have 72 of your hours to broadcast your surrender on all frequencies. Failure to comply will result in the systematic destruction of your military assets, followed by the pacification of your population centers. The transmission continued with coordinates where Earth's leaders should send their surrender, technical specifications for dismantling their defense networks, and a list of hegemony representatives who would oversee the transition. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about her daughter, Emma, who was currently serving aboard the exploration vessel Determination somewhere in the Vega system. She was thinking about her son Michael, training to be a pilot at the Academy on Mars. She was thinking about every human who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of walking among them. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving behind only static and the faint hum of the station's life support systems. Sarah's communicator crackled to life immediately. Admiral Chun, this is General Morrison at Earth Command. Emergency conference in 10 minutes. All senior staff. Understood, General. I'll be there. She stood slowly, her mind already racing through possibilities. Earth's military was formidable by human standards, but they were facing an enemy that had apparently been watching them for years. An enemy that could broadcast directly into their minds and had ships that made their dreadnoughts look like toys. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting impossible odds. The emergency conference brought together every major military leader from Earth, Mars, the Luna bases, and the outer colonies. General Harrison Morrison, the grizzled commander of Earth's unified defense forces, looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Ladies and gentlemen, he began without preamble. We have a situation. Intelligence analysis of the broadcast suggests the enemy force consists of approximately 300 capital ships, each roughly the size of our largest space stations. They're positioned just beyond the orbit of Pluto, maintaining what appears to be a standard blockade formation. Admiral Yuki Tanaka, head of the Mars Defense Fleet, leaned forward. Do we have any information about their capabilities beyond what they've shown us? Limited, Morrison admitted. But our deep space monitoring stations detected massive gravitational anomalies when they arrived. Whatever their propulsion system is, it's far beyond anything in our current understanding of physics. What about diplomatic options? Asked Colonel Rebecca Santos from the Europa Mining Consortium. Have we attempted to establish communication channels? Morrison's expression darkened. We've tried. They're not interested in negotiation. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. Sarah had been quietly studying the tactical displays showing the enemy formation. Something didn't feel right about it. The positioning was too neat, too obvious. Almost like they wanted to be detected and analyzed. "General," she said, "I'd like permission to take a small reconnaissance force out for a closer look at their fleet." "Absolutely not," Morrison replied immediately. "We're not giving them any excuse to start shooting before the 72 hours are up. With respect, sir, they're going to start shooting anyway. And, right now, we're making decisions based on incomplete information." Sarah stood and activated a holographic display showing the enemy formation. "Look at this positioning. It's textbook, too textbook. Like they're following some kind of standard procedure rather than adapting to our specific defensive capabilities." Admiral Tanaka nodded slowly. "She has a point. Most of our encounters with hostile aliens have shown they tend to underestimate human tactical flexibility. Maybe these hegemony forces are doing the same thing. Or maybe," Morrison said grimly, "they're so confident in their superiority that they don't need to hide their capabilities." Sarah pulled up another display showing Earth's current military assets. 12 heavy dreadnoughts, 47 destroyers, over 200 smaller patrol vessels, and the pride of humanity's space force, the experimental stealth ship Nightfall, equipped with the latest quantum cloaking technology. "Sir, the Nightfall could get us close enough for detailed scans without being detected. We need to know what we're really facing." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces around the table. These were men and women who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity's expansion into the stars. None of them looked ready to surrender without a fight. "Very well," he said finally. "But this is reconnaissance only. You get close, you scan, you come back. No heroics, no engagement. We need information, not martyrs." 3 hours later, Sarah found herself aboard the Nightfall with a crew of 12 specialists. Captain James Rodriguez, the ship's commander, was a veteran of the Centauri Wars with a reputation for impossible missions. "Quantum cloak is online," reported Lieutenant Maria Vasquez from the engineering station. "We should be invisible to most scanning technologies." "Should be," Rodriguez muttered. "Let's hope these hegemony sensors aren't more advanced than we think." The Nightfall slipped away from Luna Station, its sleek black hull seeming to absorb the light around it. The quantum cloaking system worked by creating a field that bent electromagnetic radiation around the ship, making it effectively invisible to most detection methods. As they moved through the outer system, the enemy fleet grew larger in their viewports. The ships were even more impressive up close, smooth, organic curves that suggested they were grown rather than built. Each vessel pulsed with a faint blue light that seemed to follow patterns too complex to understand. "My God," whispered Dr. Elena Kowalski, the mission's xenobiology expert. "Those aren't ships in the traditional sense. There's some kind of biomechanical hybrid." Sarah studied the readings on her tactical display. "Can we penetrate their hulls with our scans?" "Working on it," replied Chief Petty Officer David Kim from the sensor station. "Their hull composition is unlike anything we've encountered. It's deflecting most of our deep scans, but I'm getting some interesting energy readings." "What kind of energy readings?" Kim frowned at his console. "This doesn't make sense. The power signatures are massive, easily 10 times what our largest reactors could produce, but they're not coming from the engines or any central power source. Where are they coming from?" "Everywhere. The entire hull seems to be generating power simultaneously." Dr. Kowalski leaned over Kim's shoulder, studying the data. "That's not possible with known physics. Unless—" She paused, her eyes widening. "Unless they're tapping into quantum vacuum energy. Theoretical physicists have been trying to figure out how to do that for decades." "Can we get closer to the command ship?" Sarah asked. "The one in the center of the formation?" Rodriguez checked their position. "We can try, but we'll be well within their theoretical weapons range." "Do it." The Nightfall crept closer to the massive central vessel, which dwarfed even the other hegemony ships. As they approached, Kim's sensors began picking up more detailed information. "Admiral, I'm detecting some kind of communication array on that ship. It's broadcasting on frequencies we use for military communications." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "They're listening to our communications?" "Not just listening," Kim said, his voice tight with concern. "They're recording everything. Every order, every status report, every tactical discussion we've had since they arrived." "How is that possible?" Our military communications are encrypted with quantum keys that change every few seconds. Dr. Kowalski was already running calculations on her tablet. If they have access to quantum vacuum energy, they might be able to process the quantum information directly, essentially brute forcing our encryption in real time. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The enemy hadn't just been watching humanity develop. They'd been listening to every military secret, every tactical plan, every strategic discussion for who knows how long. Captain, get us out of here. Now. But, as the nightfall began to turn away, warning lights flashed across the bridge. Contact, Kim shouted. 3 ships breaking formation and heading our way. How did they detect us? Rodriguez demanded. I don't know, but they're moving fast. Faster than anything should be able to move in normal space. Sarah watched the tactical display as the enemy ships closed the distance with impossible speed. Each vessel was sleek and predatory, moving with the fluid grace of living creatures rather than mechanical constructs. Time to weapons range? She asked. At current speed, 90 seconds. Can we outrun them? Rodriguez was already pushing the engines to maximum. Not likely. These ships are pulling accelerations that should turn their crews into paste. Maybe they don't have crews in the traditional sense, Dr. Kowalski suggested. If they're biomechanical hybrids, the ships themselves might be the crew. 80 seconds. Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. However short that might be. Captain, prepare to drop cloak and transmit everything we've learned back to Earth Command. Full burst transmission on all frequencies. Admiral, that will give away our position completely. They already know where we are. At least this way, our people will have the intelligence they need. 70 seconds. Transmission ready. Reported communications, Officer Lisa Park. Send it. The Nightfall's quantum cloak flickered and died as it diverted power to the massive communication array. For a moment, the small human ship hung naked in space, directly in the path of 3 alien warships. The transmission burst outward at the speed of light, carrying detailed scans of the hegemony vessels, analysis of their capabilities, and, most importantly, confirmation that the enemy had been monitoring human communications. 60 seconds. Transmission complete, Park reported. Earth Command confirms receipt. Good. Now get us out of here. But it was too late. The lead enemy ship opened fire with a weapon that painted space in brilliant purple light. The beam struck the Nightfall's stern, and Sarah felt the ship shudder under the impact. Hull breach in engineering. Vasquez reported. Quantum drive is offline. 50 seconds. Without their quantum drive, they were trapped in normal space with enemies that could somehow exceed the speed of light. Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew, good people who had followed her on what was clearly a suicide mission. Captain, prepare to ram the nearest enemy ship. Admiral, if we're going down, we're taking one of them with us. Rodriguez nodded grimly. All hands, prepare for ramming speed. But, before he could engage the engines, something impossible happened. The lead enemy ship simply stopped. Not slowed down, not decelerated, stopped instantly as if it had hit an invisible wall. Then, it exploded. The blast was silent in the vacuum of space, but brilliant enough to light up half the solar system. Where the sleek alien warship had been, there was now only expanding debris and the fading glow of exotic matter annihilation. What the hell just happened? Rodriguez whispered. Sarah stared at the tactical display, trying to process what she was seeing. Kim, are you detecting any other ships in the area? Negative, Admiral. Nothing on sensors except the remaining hegemony vessels and us. Then, cutting through the static of damaged communications equipment, came a voice that Sarah recognized. Nightfall, this is Captain Marcus Webb of the Determination. Sorry we're late to the party. Sarah's heart leaped. Webb was one of Earth's best deep space commanders, currently leading an exploration mission in the Vega system. But Vega was over 25 light-years from Earth. There was no way he could be here. Marcus, how are you here? And what did you just do to that hegemony ship? Webb's voice carried a grim satisfaction. Long story, Sarah. But the short version is that we've been busy while you folks have been dealing with these hegemony bastards. And as for what happened to their ship, let's just say we learned some interesting things from the ruins we found out in Vega. On the tactical display, Sarah could see the other two hegemony pursuit ships had stopped their advance and were holding position, apparently as confused as she was. Determination to all hegemony vessels. Webb's voice broadcast on all frequencies. You wanted to see what happens when humans don't submit. Consider this your first lesson. Another ship appeared on sensors, not the determination, but something else entirely. It was clearly of human construction, but unlike any design Sarah had ever seen. Where human ships were typically angular and utilitarian, this vessel had flowing lines that seemed almost organic. And it was moving without any visible means of propulsion. Webb, what is that ship? That, Admiral, is why the hegemony is about to learn that they picked the wrong species to threaten. The unknown vessel moved toward the remaining two hegemony ships with the fluid grace of a predator. As it approached, both alien vessels opened fire with their purple energy weapons. The beams struck the human ship and simply stopped, absorbed into the hull without any visible effect. Impossible, Dr. Kowalski breathed. They're absorbing directed energy attacks. But Sarah was already thinking ahead. If Webb had found something in the Vega system that could give humanity this kind of technology, then perhaps the 72-hour deadline wasn't the death sentence it had seemed. Marcus, I need to know everything. What did you find out there? Not over an open channel, Sarah. But I can tell you this. The hegemony isn't the first alien empire that tried to conquer this galaxy. And it won't be the last to underestimate the species that calls itself human. The mysterious human ship had reached the two hegemony vessels. Instead of attacking them, it simply touched each ship with what looked like metallic tentacles extending from its hull. Both alien ships went dark immediately, their blue glow fading to black as they drifted powerless in space. Neutralized, not destroyed, Webb explained. We're going to need to study their technology, and dead enemies don't provide much useful data. Sarah realized that everything had changed. The hegemony ultimatum, the impossible odds, the seemingly hopeless situation, all of it had been transformed in the space of a few minutes. Webb, can you get us back to Earth? We need to brief command immediately. Already on our way. The determination will pick up your crew while our new friend here babysits these disabled hegemony ships. As the familiar outline of the exploration vessel determination appeared on their screens, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced since the alien ultimatum arrived: hope. But she also knew that this was only the beginning. The hegemony fleet still waited beyond Pluto's orbit, and they wouldn't take the loss of 3 ships quietly. Moreover, Webb's mysterious technology raised as many questions as it answered. What had humanity found in the ruins of Vega? How had they adapted alien technology so quickly? And, most importantly, would it be enough to face down an empire that had been controlling the galaxy for 10,000 years? As the nightfall was taken aboard the determination, Sarah looked out at the stars and realized that humanity's real test was just beginning. The aliens had ordered Earth to submit, expecting the frightened compliance they'd received from countless other species. Instead, they were about to discover why humans had earned a reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous and unpredictable species. The Midnight Fleet was about to soar, and before this was over, the sky would indeed be painted red. But first, Sarah needed to understand exactly what Captain Webb had found in those ancient ruins, because she had a feeling that humanity's survival, and their response to the hegemony ultimatum, depended on secrets that were far older and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The briefing room aboard the determination was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen on a human vessel. The walls seemed to be made of the same organic metal as the mysterious ship they'd witnessed, and strange symbols pulsed with soft light along the surfaces. But it was clearly functional. Holographic displays showed tactical information with a clarity that made Earth's best systems look primitive. Captain Marcus Webb looked older than Sarah remembered, his dark hair now streaked with gray and new lines around his eyes. But there was also something different about him, a confidence that hadn't been there before, as if he'd learned secrets that changed his entire perspective on humanity's place in the universe. Before I explain what we found at Vega, Webb began, I need you to understand something fundamental about galactic history. Everything we thought we knew about how civilizations develop is wrong. Dr. Kowalski leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her exhaustion. What do you mean? Webb activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of star systems were marked in different colors: red for current hegemony territory, blue for independent species, and a scattered pattern of gold markers that seemed to follow no recognizable pattern. The gold markers represent what we now know were the territories of the architects, Webb explained. A species that dominated this galaxy approximately 50,000 years ago, long before the hegemony or any current civilization existed. Sarah studied the map. The gold markers were everywhere, not just in the habitable zones where most species developed, but in the deep space between stars, around dangerous pulsars, even in the galactic core where radiation should have made life impossible. The architects weren't like other species, Webb continued. They didn't just adapt to environments. They adapted environments to themselves. They could survive in hard vacuum, manipulate matter at the quantum level, and, most importantly, they understood something about consciousness that we're only beginning to grasp. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Torres, Webb's chief science officer, took over the presentation. 3 months ago, we were conducting a routine survey of the Vega system when we detected an artificial structure orbiting the secondary star. Initially, we thought it was a derelict space station from an unknown civilization. The holographic display shifted to show what looked like a crystalline structure the size of a small moon. Its surface was covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they were trying to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. It was a repository, Torres explained. A combination library, laboratory, and weapons depot that the architects left behind when they departed. Departed? Sarah asked. What happened to them? Webb's expression darkened. They didn't die out or get conquered. They chose to leave this reality entirely. The records we've been able to translate suggest they discovered something about the nature of existence that made remaining in normal space-time unacceptable to them. But before they left, Torres continued, they prepared for the possibility that younger species might eventually face threats they couldn't handle alone. The Vega repository is one of dozens scattered throughout the galaxy, each containing knowledge and technology designed to be accessible only to species that had achieved a certain level of development. Dr. Kowalski was taking rapid notes on her tablet. How do you determine if a species has achieved the required level of development? It's not about technology, Webb said. It's about mindset. The architects were looking for species that would fight for their freedom rather than accept subjugation. Species that would risk everything to protect those they care about. Species like humans, Sarah finished. Exactly. The repository tested us for months before it allowed us access to even the most basic technologies. We had to prove we understood the responsibility that comes with power, and that we wouldn't use what we learned for conquest or oppression. The holographic display now showed the interior of the repository, vast chambers filled with devices that seemed to blend advanced technology with something that looked almost magical. Streams of light flowed through the air like living things, and complex equations wrote themselves in midair using symbols that shifted meaning as you watched them. The ship you saw earlier is based on architect designs, Torres explained. It's not just a vessel, it's a symbiotic organism that bonds with its crew. The hull is alive in a sense, capable of adapting to threats and repairing itself. The propulsion system doesn't push against space-time. It convinces space-time to move out of its way. Sarah tried to wrap her mind around the implications. How many of these ships can we build? That's the wrong question, Webb said. We don't build them, we grow them. And each ship chooses its own crew based on compatibility with its consciousness. The ship has consciousness. All architect technology is conscious to some degree. They believe that true artificial intelligence wasn't about creating machines that think like biological beings, but about creating new forms of life that could exist in partnership with organic consciousness. The briefing room door opened, and a young lieutenant entered, looking nervous. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony fleet. They're demanding an explanation for the attacks on their ships. Webb smiled grimly. Tell them they'll have their explanation shortly. And let them know that Earth's response to their ultimatum is about to be delivered personally. As the lieutenant left, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Marcus, please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve humanity getting extinct in the next few hours. I have a plan, Webb said. But it requires every human in space to make a choice that will fundamentally change what our species becomes. He activated another display, this one showing the current positions of all human vessels throughout the solar system. There were over 300 ships of various sizes, from massive military dreadnoughts to small civilian transports. The architect technology doesn't just work with specially built ships, Torres explained. It can be integrated with existing vessels, but the process is irreversible. Once a ship bonds with architect consciousness, it becomes something new. Part machine, part living being, part something else entirely. What happens to the crew? Sarah asked. They become more than human, Webb said simply. Not superhuman. That implies superiority over regular humans. But expanded, enhanced, capable of things that current human biology can't support. Dr. Kowalski looked up from her notes. Are we talking about some form of technological singularity? No. The architects specifically avoided that path. Technological singularity assumes that intelligence follows a linear progression, that more advanced always means better. But consciousness doesn't work that way. The architects discovered that true advancement comes from cooperation between different types of consciousness, not from one type dominating others. Sarah walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond Pluto, 300 hegemony warships waited for Earth's surrender. In 72 hours, they would begin systematically destroying everything humanity had built among the stars. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Every human ship in the fleet bonds with architect consciousness simultaneously, Webb said. Create an integrated fleet where each vessel is both individually powerful and part of a larger network. The hegemony has never faced anything like it. And the cost. No one who undergoes the bonding will be entirely human anymore. They'll still be themselves, still have their memories and personalities, but they'll also be connected to something larger. Some people won't be able to handle that level of change. Sarah thought about her daughter Emma, somewhere in the Vega system, and her son Michael, training on Mars. If this plan succeeded, would they even recognize their mother afterward? But then, she thought about the alternative. Human colonies reduced to ash. Earth's cities burning under alien weapons. Everything her species had accomplished erased because they dared to reach for the stars. How long do we have to implement this? Torres consulted her tablet. The integration process takes approximately 6 hours per ship. With the number of vessels in our fleet, we'd need to start immediately to have everything ready before the ultimatum expires. And you're certain this will work? Webb hesitated for just a moment. The architect records show that 12 other species have faced similar ultimatums from galactic empires. 9 of them accepted subjugation and spent the next 1,000 years as slaves. 2 chose to fight with conventional weapons and were exterminated. And the 12th used architect technology to not just defeat their enemies, but to fundamentally change the balance of power in their region of the galaxy. The hegemony has never encountered resistance like what we're about to show them. Sarah made her decision. What do you need from me? Full authorization to modify every ship in the fleet. And volunteers, lots of them. The bonding process requires conscious consent from every crew member. No one can be forced into this. You'll have it. Both. The next 6 hours were the most intense of Sarah's life. As word spread throughout the human fleet about the choice they faced, the response was overwhelming. Out of nearly 50,000 crew members, fewer than 300 chose to transfer to civilian vessels and return to Earth. The rest volunteered to become something unprecedented in galactic history. Sarah watched from the Determination's modified bridge as the transformation began. The first ship to undergo integration was the dreadnought Indomitable, and that the process was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. The architect consciousness appeared first as streams of golden light that flowed from the Determination to the massive warship. As the light touched the Indomitable's hull, the metal began to change, not melting or breaking apart, but flowing like liquid while maintaining its structural integrity. Integration proceeding normally, Torres reported. The Indomitable's crew is reporting enhanced sensory input and improved reaction times. Ship's consciousness is establishing communication protocols with the fleet network. One by one, the human vessels underwent the same transformation. Destroyers, frigates, patrol boats, even civilian transports. Each ship became something new while retaining its essential character. The boxy, utilitarian designs of human engineering acquired organic curves and flowing lines that suggested life rather than mere mechanism. But it was what happened to the crews that truly amazed Sarah. Through the fleet communication network, she could sense their thoughts and emotions, not intrusively, but like distant music that conveyed meaning without words. She felt their wonder as their perception expanded beyond normal human limits, their determination as they prepared for battle, and their unshakable resolve to protect Earth and everyone they loved. Admiral, came a voice that belonged to Captain Rodriguez of the former Nightfall, now something that looked like a hybrid between a warship and a living creature. We're reading massive energy discharges from the hegemony fleet. They're moving toward Earth. Sarah felt rather than heard the response from the integrated fleet. 297 ships, each with enhanced capabilities beyond anything the galaxy had seen, all speaking with one voice. Let them come. The hegemony fleet emerged from behind Pluto like a dark tide, their biomechanical ships moving in perfect formation. At their head was Overlord Kythex's command vessel, a massive construct that pulsed with malevolent energy. But, as they approached Earth's position, they found something waiting for them that defied all their intelligence reports and tactical analyses. The human fleet hung in space like a constellation of stars, each ship glowing with golden light that pulsed in perfect synchronization. They moved with fluid grace that no mechanical construct should possess, and when they spread into battle formation, it looked less like ships maneuvering and more like a living organism preparing to defend itself. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force. She broadcast on all frequencies. You ordered us to submit. We decline. Overlord Kythex's response came immediately, his mental voice carrying undertones of surprise and growing anger. Impossible. Your species lacks the technology to pose any threat to the hegemony. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. We learned something recently, Sarah replied calmly. We learned that the galaxy is full of species who accepted ultimatums like yours, who chose survival over freedom, safety over dignity. The human fleet began to move forward, not in the rigid formations that characterized most space navies, but like a school of fish or a flock of birds, each unit maintaining perfect coordination while adapting fluidly to changing conditions. We also learned, Sarah continued, that there were others who made different choices, who chose to fight even when victory seemed impossible, who chose to become something more than they were rather than accept being less than they could be. The lead hegemony ships opened fire, their purple energy weapons painting space in deadly light. But, as the beams struck the human vessels, something unprecedented happened. The ships absorbed the energy, their golden glow brightening as they converted the hegemony's attacks into additional power. Then, as one, they returned fire. But they didn't use energy weapons. Instead, streams of golden light reached out from each human ship like living things, wrapping around the hegemony vessels. Where the light touched alien metal, the biomechanical hulls began to change, not damaged or destroyed, but transformed. What is this? Kythex demanded, his mental voice now carrying real fear. What have you done? We've given you the same choice you gave us, Sarah replied. Submit to transformation, or face the consequences of your actions. The hegemony ships caught in the golden streams found their weapons offline, their propulsion systems unresponsive. But they weren't being destroyed. They were being converted, their biomechanical systems slowly adapting to work in harmony with architect technology rather than in opposition to it. The architects left us more than just weapons and ships, Sarah explained as more hegemony vessels fell to the transformation effect. They left us a choice. We can use their technology to dominate others, the way you've dominated the galaxy for 10,000 years. Or we can use it to offer liberation. Half the hegemony fleet was now caught in golden light, their crews experiencing the same expansion of consciousness that had transformed humanity. Some resisted, fighting against the change until their ships shut down entirely. Others embraced it. And Sarah could feel their wonder as they discovered what existence could be like without the rigid hierarchies and absolute control that had defined hegemony society. "You're destroying the natural order," Kythek screamed. "The strong are meant to rule the weak. The advanced are meant to control the primitive." "That's not natural order," Sarah said firmly. "That's just tyranny with better public relations." The battle, if it could even be called that, was over in less than an hour. Of the 300 hegemony ships that had come to subjugate Earth, fewer than 50 escaped. The rest had either been transformed or had their crews choose voluntary exile rather than return to their masters with news of absolute defeat. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The hegemony controlled hundreds of star systems and commanded thousands of ships. Earth had won a single engagement, not a war. However, they had also proven something that would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time in 10,000 years, a species had not only refused the hegemony's ultimatum, but had turned their own weapons against them. "Admiral," Torres reported, "we're receiving transmissions from 17 different star systems. Species that have been under hegemony control for centuries are asking if the reports of Earth's resistance are true." Sarah smiled. The hegemony's greatest weakness had always been that their empire was built on fear rather than loyalty. When that fear was broken, even slightly, the consequences would ripple outward like waves from a dropped stone. "Open channels to all of them," she ordered. "It's time they learn what humans mean by liberty or death." As the transformed human fleet prepared to carry their message of liberation to the rest of the galaxy, Sarah looked out at the stars and realized that humanity had just taken its first step toward becoming something that the architects had only dreamed of, a species that could spread freedom rather than conquest among the stars. The Midnight Fleet was soaring at last, and the red paint in the sky was just the beginning of the masterpiece they were about to create. 6 months after the failed hegemony ultimatum, Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the newly constructed Lighthouse Station, humanity's first permanent base in the Architect Repository at Vega. Through the organic crystal walls, she could see dozens of ships, some human in origin, others built from hegemony hulls that had been completely transformed, and a few that were entirely new designs born from the marriage of human creativity and architect technology. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. "Status report," Sarah requested as Captain Torres approached with a tablet full of intelligence data. "The Liberation fleets have successfully freed 47 star systems in the past 4 months," Torres reported. "Total refugee count is now over 3 billion sentient beings. The hegemony has lost approximately 30% of their territorial control." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "What about resistance? The hegemony can't be taking these losses quietly." "They're not. Intelligence indicates they're massing their remaining forces in the galactic core region. Our scouts report ship movements that suggest they're preparing for a massive counterattack." Before Sarah could respond, the command center's communication array activated with the distinctive harmonics that indicated an architect-enhanced transmission. The voice that emerged belonged to Captain Webb, currently leading the 3rd Liberation Fleet in the Orion Arm. "Sarah, we have a problem. The hegemony just deployed something we've never seen before." A holographic display materialized in the center of the command center, showing the aftermath of what looked like a stellar-scale disaster. An entire star system had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris, and at the center of the destruction floated a single massive construct that hurt to look at directly. "They call it a reality anchor," Webb continued, his voice tight with concern. "It appears to be some kind of weapon that can prevent architect technology from functioning in a localized area. 3 of our ships got caught in its effect field, and they reverted to normal human vessels. The crews survived, but they lost all connection to the architect network." Dr. Kowalski, now the chief researcher at Lighthouse Station, leaned forward to study the readings. "This doesn't make sense. Architect technology operates by harmonizing with quantum field fluctuations. To suppress it completely would require—" She paused, her face pale with realization. "Would require what?" Sarah asked. "They'd have to be using architect technology against itself. This reality anchor is built with the same fundamental principles as our ships, but inverted. Instead of enhancing consciousness and cooperation, It enforces isolation and rigid structure. Torres checked her tablet for updated intelligence reports. If they can build one of these weapons, can they build more? Unknown, Kowalski admitted. But if they can mass-produce reality anchors, they could potentially undo every liberation we've achieved. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. The transformed human fleet had been incredibly successful because hegemony forces had no defense against architect technology. But if their enemies could neutralize that advantage, we need more information, she decided. Torres, prepare a reconnaissance mission to the galactic core. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. Admiral, with respect, sending ships into hegemony core territory is essentially suicide. Even with our enhanced capabilities, they outnumber us 100 to 1 in that region. Then, we don't send ships, Sarah said, a plan forming in her mind. We send volunteers. 3 days later, Sarah found herself aboard a ship unlike anything that had ever existed in the galaxy. The Transcendence wasn't built or grown. It was willed into existence by a group of volunteer humans who had undergone the deepest possible integration with architect consciousness. The 12-person crew no longer had individual bodies in the traditional sense. Instead, they existed as a collective consciousness that could manifest physical form when necessary, but spent most of their time as pure thought and were made manifest in the quantum structure of their vessel. Sarah herself had undergone a partial version of the same process, maintaining her individual identity while gaining the ability to communicate directly with the ship's collective mind. We're approaching the hegemony core fleet, reported the consciousness that had once been Lieutenant Commander Maria Vasquez. Detecting massive gravitational distortions consistent with reality anchor deployment. Through the ship's enhanced senses, Sarah could perceive the hegemony's final stronghold. Thousands of warships surrounding a cluster of massive space stations, all orbiting the galaxy's central black hole. At the heart of the formation sat 3 reality anchors, each one the size of a small moon and radiating waves of distortion that made normal space-time ripple like water. Can we get closer without being detected? The Transcendence exists partially outside normal reality, came the collective response. We should be able to approach undetected, but if they activate all 3 reality anchors simultaneously, we'll be forced back into normal space within range of their weapons. Sarah studied the tactical situation. The hegemony hadn't just built a fortress. They'd created a zone where their enemy's greatest advantage would be neutralized. Any liberation fleet that approached would find itself suddenly vulnerable to conventional weapons, facing odds that even transformed humans couldn't overcome. But as she watched the enemy formations, Sarah noticed something that gave her hope. Look at their crew rotations, she told the collective, and the energy signatures from their ships. The Transcendence's enhanced sensors focused on the details Sarah had spotted. After a moment, the collective understanding shifted to match her realization. They're afraid, said the consciousness that had been Chief Engineer David Kim. The reality anchors don't just suppress our technology, they suppress their own biomechanical enhancements. They're operating with reduced capabilities to maintain their advantage. Which means, Sarah continued, they're as trapped by their own weapon as we would be. She opened a communication channel to the Liberation fleets scattered throughout the galaxy. All ships, this is Admiral Chun. I need every volunteer willing to undergo final transformation. We're going to give the hegemony a demonstration of what humans do when faced with impossible odds. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From 47 liberated star systems, from refugee camps and resistance movements, from species that had never known freedom in their lifetimes, volunteers came forward. They weren't all human anymore. The liberation fleets had attracted members of dozens of species who had chosen transformation over subjugation. But they all shared the fundamental human concept that some things were worth any sacrifice to defend. Over the next week, Sarah watched as volunteer after volunteer underwent the process of collective transcendence. Unlike the original architect technology, which maintained individual consciousness within a connected network, this new process created something unprecedented. A truly collective mind that retained the memories and personalities of its component individuals while becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. By the time the final transformation was complete, the human liberation forces had fundamentally changed their nature. Instead of a fleet of enhanced ships with enhanced crews, they had become a distributed consciousness that could manifest physical form when needed but existed primarily as thought and while operating through quantum reality. The hegemony is demanding our surrender, Torres reported from her position as part of the collective consciousness that now operated Lighthouse Station. Overlord Kythex is threatening to activate additional reality anchors if we don't withdraw from liberated territories. Sarah, now existing as both individual and part of the greater collective, smiled. Tell him he's welcome to try. The final battle began not with weapons or ships, but with a simple question broadcast on all frequencies throughout the galaxy. What if you didn't have to choose between freedom and safety? The question reached every hegemony world, every slave colony, every enforcer ship, and garrison station. It was asked in thousands of languages by consciousness that had once been human but had become something that transcended species boundaries. And for the first time in 10,000 years, billions of beings throughout the galaxy began to ask themselves why they accepted the hegemony's rule. The effect was immediate and catastrophic to hegemony control. Rebellions erupted on worlds that hadn't seen resistance in millennia. Enforcer fleets found themselves facing mutinies as crew members questioned orders they'd followed without thought for generations. But the real shock came when the human collective made its final move. Instead of attacking the hegemony core fleet with weapons or transformation technology, they offered something far more dangerous: choice. The collective consciousness reached out through quantum space, bypassing the reality anchors entirely, and touched the minds of every being in the hegemony fleet. Not to control or transform them, but to show them what existence could be like without the rigid hierarchies and absolute obedience that had defined their civilization. For beings who had known only submission and domination, the experience was transformative. Within hours, the hegemony core fleet was in chaos. Ships drifted powerless as their crews grappled with concepts of individual will and personal choice. The reality anchors, maintained by beings who could no longer imagine choosing to enforce oppression, began to shut down one by one. Overlord Kythex, his mental voice now filled with genuine terror, made one final broadcast. You've destroyed everything. Without order, without hierarchy, without control, the galaxy will descend into chaos. Sarah, speaking for the collective while maintaining her individual voice, responded with quiet certainty. You're right that we've destroyed something. We've destroyed the idea that freedom and order are opposites. We've destroyed the lie that some beings are born to rule while others are born to serve. Around the galaxy, former hegemony worlds were discovering that freedom didn't mean chaos. Communities were forming based on cooperation rather than compulsion, and species that had been enemies for millennia were finding common ground in their shared desire for self-determination. The architects were right about one thing, Sarah continued. True advancement comes from cooperation between different types of consciousness. But they were wrong about something else. They thought they had to leave normal reality to achieve it. As if in response to her words, something unprecedented happened. The quantum distortions around the galaxy's center began to shift and stabilize into new patterns. The collective consciousness of liberated beings was creating something new, not a civilization based on domination or submission, but a community of minds that chose to work together while maintaining their individual identities. Humans didn't just refuse your ultimatum, Sarah told the remnants of the hegemony leadership. We transformed it into an invitation to discover what the galaxy could become when every conscious being has the freedom to choose their own destiny. The last reality anchor went dark, its operators choosing to join the growing collective rather than continue enforcing isolation. Throughout the galaxy, the rigid boundaries between species, between conquered and conqueror, between ruler and ruled, began to dissolve. Not through force or transformation, but through the simple recognition that all conscious beings deserve the right to determine their own existence. 1 year after the hegemony's ultimatum, Sarah stood, or rather, manifested physical form, on the observation deck of what had once been Overlord Kythex's command ship. The vessel now served as a mobile embassy, carrying representatives of the new galactic community to star systems that were still deciding whether to join the liberation. Through the viewport, she could see dozens of ships from hundreds of different species, all working together to establish the infrastructure of true freedom. Some were enhanced with architect technology, others remained purely biological or mechanical, and a few existed as pure consciousness like the human collective. But they all shared one thing: they were there by choice. Any regrets? Asked the consciousness that had once been Captain Webb, now part of the collective but still maintaining his individual perspective. Sarah considered the question. Humanity had changed beyond recognition. Earth itself was now home to multiple forms of consciousness, some biological, some mechanical, some purely digital. The rigid categories of human and non-human, organic and artificial, individual and collective had become fluid concepts rather than absolute definitions. No regrets, she said finally. We set out to prove that submission isn't the only response to superior force. We ended up proving something even more important: that there's no such thing as superior force when conscious beings choose to stand together. Throughout the galaxy, former hegemony worlds continued to discover what freedom meant. Some chose to remain purely biological, others embraced technological enhancement, and still others opted for forms of existence that had never been imagined before. But they all chose. The Midnight Fleet had indeed soared, painting the sky not just red with the blood of tyrants, but with every color of the spectrum, as billions of beings discovered that the universe was large enough for every form of consciousness to find its place. And, in the end, that was the most human thing of all: not the refusal to submit, not the willingness to fight impossible odds, but the insistence that everyone deserved the right to choose their own destiny. The hegemony had ordered Earth to submit. Instead, humanity had taught the galaxy how to be free. As Sarah looked out at the stars, she could sense the collective consciousness of liberated beings spread across thousands of worlds, all connected yet all individual, all different yet all united in their commitment to protecting each other's right to choose. The galaxy had indeed been painted red, red with the dawn of a new age where freedom was not a privilege to be granted by the powerful, but a right to be claimed by every conscious being. And it had all started with a simple human response to an impossible demand: we decline.